Welcome to The Laws of Style, featuring conversations on creativity, fashion, and the law from the leading edge of our economy and culture. Hosted by noted fashion lawyer Douglas Hand.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast, The Laws of Style. Downloading to you from the offices of the law firm HBA, high above Bryant Park in the Garment District of New York City. I'm your host, Douglas Hand, fashion law professor, fashion lawyer, and self-styled, well-dressed man. We have a treat for you today. For this episode, I'm joined by photographer, visual director, and writer, Dario Calmese. Dario, thanks for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here, man.
So, you and I first met when you were doing the photographs for the CFDA incubator program.
That's great.
I had the good fortune to be a mentor in that program for a bit of time, and you were taking profile shots. You're also a writer, both for Huffington Post and a couple of other publications, Daily Beast. You're a staff photographer still for the CFDA. You have like 7 jobs. So how do you self-describe it? Do you have like 7 different business cards, or do you have one business card that says epic creator?
I have one business card that just has my name on it and my website. But I think I describe myself as, an artist, writer, academic, and essentially just sitting at this nexus between art, fashion, and academia. Mm-hmm. And those are really the 3 kind of areas that feed me and feed my work. Mm-hmm. And I exist independently and at times combined with all of those 3.
Well, as a photographer,
mm-hmm.
One of those components, you've built a career around showing the world what you see, through your eyes, through your lens. What would you say uniquely describes your perspective on the world?
I would say the through line of my work, and that spills over into photography as well, is just storytelling. I have a background in theater, so I actually started out as a performer. That's how I originally came to New York, singing, dancing, acting. And so that really fuels a lot of my work as well. So thinking about character, thinking about storyline, through line. And as a visual artist, really looking at details. And I think that's every medium has its strengths and weaknesses. And I think for photography, it's to be able to capture a moment, because everything in life is moving. Moments are fleeting. But photography has the ability to actually still and crystallize a moment. And I think it's Roland Barthes who says that photography is a clock for seeing. And so not only do I think about, this moment, but like zeroing in on a moment. So I'm very much interested, and perhaps it has a background in my mother being a seamstress and details, fabric, cloth, texture, but I'm very much interested in these very small moments that occur around us, mm-hmm. and freezing those, because we never really see those.
Right.
Or we never think about it.
So how do you infuse your personality into the photographs? Is that something that you do through framing them, through deciding when to pull the trigger and click, lighting? How do you accomplish that?
Actually, I can maybe divide it into like my personal work and then my commercial work.
Okay.
So my personal work, I'm really just interested in details. I'm interested in fleeting moments that occur that only photography can capture. And whether that be detail of skin, detail of a garment, the texture, those are the things that I'm interested in. And then also playing with scale. So if you ever see the work printed, usually I'm playing with scale as well. So these things that are very quotidian and very tiny have a larger than life presence when you encounter them. So then they actually become something else, but very much focused on form, line, shape. When I'm doing my commercial work, I think my playfulness comes out a bit more. My 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 comic personality. I always say, like, if we're not laughing on set, then it's not a good shoot. And luckily, I work with clients that pretty much allow me to do what I want to do, or I can at least convince them to let me do what I want to do. But really, just playing that's a much more theatrical kind of setup. But like heavily referenced in like my interests, which are history, performance, and at times social justice. So like even I will infuse like small elements. For example, I did a shoot for Elizabeth Kennedy, and she wanted to have all of these extras in the background. And so I set up all of these like micro scenarios in the background. Maybe you don't notice them when you look at the image because you're like looking at the dress. Like I make sure to make the dress the forefront, but there are all of these small things that are happening, like with this white guy chasing this Asian girl and like finally like getting her, or like this cougar like preying on this like black guy. Like this, but it's all happening in in the images in the back, but nobody sees it.
A panda bear like wrestling with a
crazy.
dragon.
It's whack. Like it's whack, but it's like little
that.
small inside jokes.
Well, to other artists or photographers, I mean, I was looking at one of your more recent studies. It reminded me of Mapplethorpe. Any influences that you have either from other photographers or artists that
tons. The Mapplethorpe comparison is interesting. I've gotten it a couple of times. And I've seen Mapplethorpe's work, but I'm not really looking at his work. I'm not studying his work at all. However, the subject matter is kind of similar, but I think people who really know photography, and this, I hope that doesn't sound elitist, can see that we're really not doing the same thing at all, not even in the way we shoot. I just think when people think about the body or abstract nude or something like that, they just kind of go to Mapplethorpe. And in a way, actually, my work could serve actually as a buttress or an antithesis to Mapplethorpe's artistic practice, because his was much more about objectification, and specifically the objectification of black men and black men's bodies, and the exotification of that body and the fetishizing of that body. And mine is actually a buttress against that, which is a big reason why I actually rarely show frontal nudity, why you don't see the face at all. So you actually really are not even sure what you're looking at. You just know that it's human. And usually my subject matter are black men. And so it's a way to reframe the black body in a place that's abstract but just reduced to humanity and beauty, which I think are two things that we rarely, or that we as an American culture are challenged to map onto the black body, because there's so many other things that are mapped on, but just humanity and beauty are rarely put on.
Well, so you've obviously done a lot of commercial work for fashion brands. How has that informed your personal work? Or, you sort of created a bifurcation as you described what you do with my first question. But how is there similarity? Does one inform the other, or do you view them as sort of, I wear the hat forwards, and then when I turn it backwards, I'm doing my fashion gig?
I do see them as separate. And one, because one is really what I want to do, and the other is, as in service of another brand. So So there are things that I have to consider. And for me, I love them both, actually. It's not like I, hate to do commercial work and this is all I really want to be doing. I love the opportunity to have like an expanded vision, to collaborate with a designer, to really dig deep into the ethos of their brand and offer something that feels like uniquely them, but also allows them to grow or get into the places that they want to be. And that's something that's also very important to me, is to speak with brands and ask them, where do you want to be? Like, where are you and where do you want to be? And how can I help you get there? And that's something that I've been able to do multiple times with multiple brands, and I think with some success, which is great.
What's your process for that? Is that sitting down with the creative heads
Yep.
or the one creative director and really having a meaningful conversation?
Absolutely.
Do you due diligence before that about the brand, or are you, I mean, you're an astute both consumer as well as just fan of brands, so you know most of them. But is there a process that you go through before a commercial job that is somewhat rote?
Perhaps not like formulaic,
Well,
but I do.
I don't mean to suggest you're overly formalizing it, but because each brand is different, and as you dig into it, you're going to have a different reaction and a different.
No, but I approach it like an academic, like as a scholar, as a research project, and it's a skill that I learned with public school.
Right. So you were with public school as what was your title? You were visual director.
Right. So I started as a
school.
photographer. I was in grad school. I came in as a photographer, and I just so happened to come into the brand right when they were showing for the first time in February of 2012. How I ended up in a production meeting, I have no idea. How I ended up speaking in the production meeting, I have no idea. But I think the guys quickly realized that I was more than just a photographer. And so then I helped them with casting that show.
Okay.
And then after I graduated, Dow called me and he's like, I don't know where you are, because I was actually in Asia. And he's like, but we have work for you to do, so let's get to work. And so then I just took over much more responsibility, because the brand was very small at the time. It was Dow, Max, a guy for production, and pretty much me. And then a guy came in to do denim later. So I learned a lot. But when
that was back when they were menswear only.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And but it was a really great lesson, because when I met with Max and I met with Dow, they had all of these references and all of these names that I never heard of. And I was like, I don't know what these guys, London Teddy Boy, I was like, what are these guys talking about? I have no idea. And so I was a bit nervous, but I was like, but I know I can learn this. Like, I know I'm just going to study it. I'm just going to and it happened right before Christmas break. So I went home and I just researched. And I knew that I got it when I was in a museum while I was home in St. Louis, and I saw this painting, and I texted Dow the painting, and I was like, I don't know, but there's something about this that feels right. And Dow was like, yo, that's it. And that's when I knew that I got it.
Yeah.
And what I learned was that, all brands, and not only brands, but companies, municipalities, countries, have a language. They have a design language. They have a visual language. And just like Spanish, French, Italian, you can learn it. Like, if you study like what those visual vowels and consonants and things are, you can actually dig right in. And for me, then offer something that feels very unique, but it is about that deep dive. And so that's something that I do with brands and companies that I work with. I ask them, what are the movies that you love? What books are you reading? What was the last art gallery show that you went to that you loved, outside of whatever it is that they actually produce?
Right.
And yeah, so that's maybe the way that I work with brands, is that I just do a deep dive into who they are and what they're interested in. Outside of actually maybe the thing that they produce.
Are there any brands today, maybe specific to menswear, that you feel are doing it extremely right? And I'm not talking on a commercial level now. I'm speaking really purely aesthetically. Pregnant pause.
To be honest, I'm not really sure, because I am usually, when I'm working with fashion and Fashion Week, I'm just like working with the brand that I'm into and not really looking left or right.
Right.
I think maybe recently, what Virgil did for Louis Vuitton was great. I think. Oh, do you know? Actually, I just discovered this brand, Filson.
Filson, yeah.
I'd never heard of them. And I
They've
was
been
actually,
around for a while. That's a legacy
like a long
brand.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was at the Philip Lim store and I walked past this
Right
store and I
next
was like,
door,
oh, this
right?
looks cool.
Yeah.
What is this? And I went in and I was like, okay, Americana. Okay, it's like Carhartt meets Woolrich meets Barber. Okay. But what I liked about the brand was that it was actually, one, it was very authentic. Two, it was very well made. And for me, I was actually just having this conversation with a friend yesterday. Me personally, I'm really into clothes that work. So fashion is great, but if the coat actually doesn't keep you warm, or the shoes actually don't protect you, like the boots don't protect you in the snow in New York winter, like I'm not gonna buy it. It may look great, but me personally, those aren't the things that I'm interested in. And Filson has a way of creating workwear, kind of everyday wear for men that's like just quite fashionable. Like the cuts are just right to not make you look like a fashion victim, but like that you cared. But you don't have to think much about it. And they actually work.
And it works.
Because I also work in the studio. I'm in the studio every day, which is, dusty and all of these things. And so the actual utility of clothing and my ability to wear them and maybe sully them and not look crazy is something that's actually very important to me.
And the physicality of your job. I mean, I've worked with photographers, shot with photographers, and you guys are
climbing cranes,
exactly.
going down into pits, like all of these things.
Yeah. So there is a there's a real necessity for those clothes to respond.
Absolutely.
And last. Well, let's flip to a question I often ask last, but since we're talking about brands that you love, I always like to cover this sort of who, what, why, where, when of what my guest is wearing. So starting with, and I know you recently visited the Philip Lim store and you have a lovely Philip Lim jumper on.
I feel like I might be an ad for Philip Lim.
But who are you wearing? Well, let's start with what are you wearing today? And this is really for our viewers who aren't watching on YouTube and are just listening on iTunes.
So I'm wearing a heather gray, oversized knit sweater with long sleeves.
I love how Philip plays with proportion like that, particularly a man's proportion. So yes, the sweater.
I'm wearing a pair of denim trousers, blue denim trousers, cuffed, a pair of black leather lace-up boots, and underneath it all is a layer of Uniqlo Heat Tech. Oh, and a black
The lid.
baseball cap.
As I can
St. Louis.
see, your hometown, yes?
My hometown.
Excellent.
Repping.
Okay, so who? We know the jumper is Philip Lim. To the extent you know, which brands are you wearing?
I don't know the name of the hat, but I think it's the Cardinal Company, like
Okay.
St. Louis Cardinals. It's
I'll
their brand.
back up and get to your accessories, by the way, because
Okay.
your earrings we forgot about, which they're gorgeous.
Oh, thank
But
you.
We'll get to accessories last.
So I think it's from the St. Louis Cardinals organization.
Okay. So it's New Era or one of the
maybe,
licensees. I
but
thought it might be Todd Snyder because I know he did a recent.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, they literally have a shop in the mall in St. Louis that just sells St. Louis Cardinal paraphernalia. So it might be New Era.
No. It's interesting little factoid. If you buy specifically from the team store, then the team doesn't have to share overall royalties with the other teams as opposed to buying off of a purveyor that's more generalized. So when you buy from a team store,
it really goes right to them.
Yeah, think about it as a contribution to your team, or
And
more
St.
of a
Louis is
contribution to your team.
crazy, like crazy Cardinals fans. My parents are too. Sweater is Philip Lim. The jeans are actually also Uniqlo.
Okay.
The boots are also Philip Lim.
Oh, wow.
Um,
And those lace up
yeah,
almost
all the way-
mid-calf? Wow.
Yeah.
Those are great. Those are lovely.
But it's like a very, like, just New York, you know?
Yeah.
New York is a city that I think also forces you to buy functional clothes. I think New York will prove how cheap your shoes are. You know, if you skimp on your shoes, like New York will show you exactly how much good shoes.
Well,
are
as
worth.
a guy born in Los Angeles, you know, not a four-season city, and not a walking city, you know, I often believe that one of the reasons I was drawn to New York was the ability, you know, to not only wear good shoes, but you know, the seasonality of clothing. I you know, was sort of the kid who would be wearing what you're wearing, you know, on a November day in Laguna Beach, California,
Sweating.
and just be sweating. But so how about the when? And by the
Also,
when,
and
so the earrings.
The earrings are actually a peace treaty. You know
Okay,
Dana,
yeah, of course.
an
incubator designer.
Yeah.
They're lovely. And are they anything specific, or are they just a?
Sterling silver, like the material?
No,
or-
I more meant the figure.
I to
Just
be
a
honest,
shape.
I'm not sure, but a peace treaty, their whole kind of brand ethos or concept is that they work with local artisans from around the world,
Right.
And they do a lot of work in India and then also like in South America, Colombia, and so this is actually a pattern that's repeated in a lot of Mesoamerican carvings,
Okay.
but then also crosses over into kind of Indian artwork as well. So like even when I was in Mexico, people were like,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, your earrings!" Like, da da da. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on to the when question.
When. So
the
this is
seasonality of
Current
these items.
season, Philip Lim.
Yeah.
The hat, I guess, is
Seasonless.
seasonless, yes.
Right. The
But
denim,
new.
seasonless.
But this is actually new from Uniqlo. So I was there
Okay.
buying Heat Tech,
Yeah.
and I saw these trousers, and I was like, oh, I never really wear color, like outside of black and gray. And I tried them on, and they fit, perfectly, and they have just like a little bit of elastic. So again, just kind of the ease of movement. And these boots, I got these actually at a Philip Lim sample sale, which makes me think that they are fall 17.
Well, bravo on that, because most of my guests can't name a single season of a single item, including guests I've had that are buyers for large retailers.
Oh,
who
and
have
my
been.
watch. So my watch is a Swedish brand, TID.
Okay, right.
And it's a limited edition that they did with the design company. So they made like 500 of them, but they have this beautiful white on white face and black.
Yeah, that's
so
stunning.
I just like simplicity.
But so I noticed that, like me, and in adherence with one of the laws of style, you have a matching watch band to the leather on your boots to your cap. Is that something that you feel strongly about, matching, belt leather, watch band leather, shoes, or is black a default for you for a lot of accessory items?
It's a default for me just because I pretty much wear the same thing every day. But yes, I also had a mother who instilled in me very early that your belt always had to match your shoes. That's number one. So yes.
Well, and one of the things I sometimes struggle with is if I'm wearing a watch that has a different color band, which, Mom didn't talk about watch bands and shoes, at least not in my house. For me, it's always important to have some bridge. If the shoes are two-tone, perhaps, or if I can maybe get a two-tone belt, which kind of bridges those leathers, then I feel comfortable and therefore confident, and I'm exuding the style that I can exude.
I try to have like one of each thing. I actually don't have multiple, like the idea of multiple like watches, maybe when I was younger, but because I travel so much, I just like to my things like streamline and simplify, like one watch until that thing falls off,
Yeah.
and then move on to the next, or until I lose it, which is also likely, just as likely.
Well, so pivoting a little bit, you've written about the invisible men and women of black fashion.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great article.
Thank you.
You noted, for instance, that only 1% of the brands at the time that you wrote the article listed in Vogue were by black designers. You lamented the omission of Ann Lowe's name in conversations about Jackie O's wedding dress. Do you think things are getting better?
I do think things are getting better. I think, and I spoke to a friend of mine about this who's a fashion studies major at Parsons, but speaking about the role that Black Lives Matter had in culture in general, I believe that through this, kind of activism and awareness, it actually spilled over into many industries. And there were just a lot of conversations about inclusion, and in many spaces where perhaps the people themselves were not prejudiced or racist or anything like that, but just because, they've never had to wonder or think about, do we have enough diversity here? Just because, the privileges that they've had, being white. All of a sudden we're like, oh, there are no black people here, or we don't have any women here, or we don't have any Asians. Like, we need to have these voices. And the more I travel, the more I realize that America's one of its greatest assets is actually its diversity. It's the thing that actually keeps it churning. It's the thing that it's the fuel that
it's
keeps
the most
us
American thing about America.
Yeah, moving more towards this perfect union, because you always have a group who is pushing for their voice, which forces us to have another conversation, so it can go from, Occupy Wall Street, into Black Lives Matter, into like the Me Too movement. So anyway, I say all that to say that I do think that it's better. I don't think that it's reached the kind of level of diversity that we need to have. I think, having, images where we see more models of color, I think that's great. But in places of decision making, it still very much looks the same. And that's how brands get tripped up. They do not have those voices at the table with them to maybe think about having this guy in this shirt that says monkey, the coolest monkey in the jungle, is that we might want to rethink that, right? But because of, I don't want to say they're privileged, but just really just the way that you grow up in the world, you're just never thinking about that because you've never had to.
I also think we're at a moment where what the general public sees, the consuming public, is a rise of, the Virgil Ablohs, the Kirby Jean Roman, right? You've got Heron Preston Johnson. You've got these people who are achieving a level of recognition, but they're the designers. They're not the buyers. They're not necessarily. So there is an entire infrastructure to the fashion industry, which is a system.
Yep.
And you would posit, I think, probably correctly, that there hasn't been as significant a shift. And I'm just naming names. I mean, these are guys who we now know of. I'm not listing numbers because I can't, brands. But do you think that's really a kernel of the issue, that systemically we haven't seen a balance within the system?
Yes, that I would say. And I think you can look at the executive boards of every fashion house that, I don't know, grosses more than $1 million, and it would look even less diverse than 1%.
Yeah. So the rise of, and for those not watching, I'm throwing air quotes up here, streetwear, right? Or urban wear. Kirby famously said, I just want to understand what's being called street. my clothes or me.
Right. Very important.
Is that troubling? Is that, I hear street and I think a lot of things, street style photography, for instance, has nothing to do with race. It has to do with people trying to get photographed by, by,
the
by that
paparazzi.
group by the paparazzi. But do you think that those labels diminish the accomplishments of these designers, or do you think that they are just categorizing and that it's not a troubling development that urban and street seem to have been somewhat appropriated to put a label on black designers?
Well, I think that streetwear, if we're just going to use this terminology, I think streetwear as a term has developed. I think, like thinking back public school days,
right?
Public school was called streetwear. And that was something that Dow and I had a conversation about.
And by the way, for our listeners, I have a gray flannel public school suit that I have worn into boardrooms, that I have worn at M&A closings, and doesn't look like I should be on a skateboard or on the subway in it. I look perfectly appropriate as a lawyer wearing it.
And so this was the thing, that because Max is black, Dow is Asian, both from New York, they just labeled the brand streetwear because of what the designers looked like, not because of what they were designing. And at the time, they were making tux jackets, double-breasted suits, like really beautiful, tailored suiting, jackets, coats, and even like a motorcycle jacket that they were really known for in the beginning. And this isn't streetwear, but they were labeled streetwear. So there's the 2012 version of streetwear, or what people wanted streetwear to be labeled. And I think now in 2019 there is there exists an Off-White, and then there's Supreme, and even Visvim. And so streetwear has taken on a luxe patina. And it's also something that even older houses are trying to dip into, certain collections that Karl Lagerfeld does for Chanel, or name any brand, they've all dipped into it. Even now at Balenciaga, there is this notion that this is what we need. We need to, have access to this. And that can also be troubling in a way, and that's maybe a larger conversation too about, and I don't want to necessarily call it appropriation, because that's also a very loaded and triggering word, but just that, like a brand like Balenciaga is obviously referencing and pulling from like 90s hip hop culture, and the ability for this designer to capitalize and succeed off of the fashioning and the stylings of disenfranchised people from the 90s can be also a bit problematic, but that's
well, so on that subject, Gucci and its homage to Dapper Dan that went unattributed.
I wrote about that.
I know you did. The Gucci seems to have rebounded from that. Not that they took any economic hit, but I think from Gucci's perspective, it might have been a subtle irony in that they would point to, well, Dapper Dan, was appropriating our trademark at the time. But at least, I think maybe your response would be, but he was certainly recognizing Gucci in that appropriation, whereas, during that show, before that show, after that show, there was no actual reference until it was pointed out by people such as yourself.
Right.
What do you think about Virgil's ascension up, to Louis Vuitton, and how that will potentially affect things?
Well, I actually want to pull back, back up really quickly to the Dapper Dan thing, because even Dapper Dan screen printing Gucci and other luxury houses onto leather needs a bit of context, because Dapper Dan actually tried to sell.
They wouldn't sell
and
to him.
they wouldn't let him sell it. So he actually tried to sell these brands, and they refused. And so he was like, I'll just make it myself. Like, and he figured out a way to make it. So he actually did try to go through the proper channels to actually get it done, and was just forced to do it, and ended up, creating something completely new and completely different. And he wasn't necessarily copying; he was just using the idea of luxury to kind of create this hip hop world of the '90s. Virgil. I don't want to sound like a dick. I don't think about Virgil too much, but I do admire the lane that he's carved out for himself, and I think that he's a model to think about creativity moving forward. I think we are easing out of an era of the specialists. I think, one, I just think human beings and creatives are multifaceted beings, period. But Virgil is also a slasher, right? So he's a designer slash DJ slash, like, because I think he was like a creative director for Kanye. So I guess slash creative producer. He's like has a furniture line with IKEA. And so I think just thinking about creativity and execution, I think he's a really great model to just explore your curiosity, and I think that's where we're moving towards, that people are doing multiple things. As far as his design aesthetic, I mean, do you want me to talk about this as well?
Yeah. Well, and
I looked at the show at Louis Vuitton. I think it's great. Visuals are always great. It's always good to have someone that looks like you doing something that you may want to do, because when they aren't there, there's a subconscious or unconscious message that this is not for you, or that you can't make it here. Right. So just his visibility, I think, is great. I think his hype is great. The brand Off-White, I think it's good. I find that it can be a bit derivative, and someone who knows fashion history can really see where Virgil's pulling from. And I think Virgil at times also can be found, or his notation of where he pulls from can be found wanting, just like other brands who pull from other designers or other cultures. Their recognition of that can be found wanting as well. And so I think anyone who knows fashion history and looks at an Off-White collection can clearly see where Virgil's pulling from. However, he's dealing with an audience and a streetwear young generation Y. Maybe are we Generation Z, or is Generation Z? Maybe we're Generation Z. Audience who does not know like who Margiela is.
Right.
And they're like, oh my God, Virgil's like, and I'm like, this is Margiela. He's like, just copy Margiela. So.
Well, and look, in the context of apparel in particular, I mean, you virtually cannot but pull from someone.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So every designer is standing on the shoulders of their predecessors.
Right.
In a way, it's about timing, right? It's about you're pulling from various reference sources, but you're doing it at a moment. It's within a context that fits your brand story, and you articulate it well.
Yeah, it's like a musical revival.
Yeah,
we were talking about musicals,
right? But it's best to attribute appropriately. It both, I think, speaks highly of the designer that they know.
And
exactly. Of the creative process that they actually give credit where it may be due.
Right. Or at least delineate far enough that we can see that you're like reintroducing it in a new context.
Right. Because really, one never knows, where things truly originated.
Right.
It could be with some artisan down in Peru or Spain, or that will remain unnamed, and unaccoladed. In the Laws of Style, I quote you. Yes. Don't know if you knew that. You're in the index. But, I talk about an old guard at white-collar institutions like where I used to work in a big law firm. And they cling to certain patriarchal vestiges of authority and power. Things like the contrast collar dress shirt used to be called the partner shirt. I think still is. Suspenders with critters on them or sort of wild stripes. Three-piece suits, like actually what I'm in today, but hey, I've made it. but
You have actually.
You said, and I'm just going to read the quote here, lest I get it wrong, in a racialized, patriarchal, and misogynist America, masculinity, or at least a convincing masculine performance, is a prized possession. Highly gendered items like suiting, and I'm paraphrasing there, you list off a few, serve as visual and cultural shorthand to imitate and reinforce male prowess, which I think was just a great articulation of the point I was trying to make in the book. So, we violently agree. There are certain items of dress that are charged with legacy and entitlement. What are so I've listed those off, at least for me and in my experience. What are some of those items for you?
I think it really depends on the context, right? I think it depends on the culture in which you find yourself. I find that when I'm in Paris, I dress differently than I do when I'm in New York. When I was in Turkmenistan, I dressed very differently than I did when I was in Mexico City.
Right.
There are just certain things you're able to get away with. For example, in so I also have this really fabulous public school cape. I don't know if you remember when they made this
I wanted that
wool,
cape. I wanted that cape so badly.
Baby, I got that cape, and I can only
because capes. I am prognosticating the comeback, the return of the cape.
FDR, his
It's
cape
a great
style
garment.
was sickening, and I'm talking, and he was like Dracula floor length cape,
with the lined cape. Anyway, I
so-
remember this cape.
But the public school cape, I can only wear it on Halloween in New York because people are going to look at me like I'm crazy. But in Turkmenistan, a culture where kind of costume and elegance is really appreciated. I literally wore the cape around. In New York, I mean, the baseball cap, that's just a clean, urban look, black on black, super chic. It works. It fits within these masculine paradigms. But even this elongated sweater can kind of push it for New York and American fashion, right? Because it kind of could look like a dress and it's a little too long. But then you go to Africa and, men wear nothing but long flowing robes and
tunics
skirts and exactly.
Yeah.
So
Mexico City. I mean, that shirt, I'm forgetting the name of it, but that sort of long, meant to be, the original untucked shirt or untuck it. That's meant to be worn long and is loose and only buttons sort of 2-3 button profile.
So I think it really depends on the cultural context you find yourself in, and I think it also then takes a level of confidence or self-assuredness to maybe push some of those boundaries. I think some people exist in a mental framework where they cannot help but fully be themselves despite the way that people look at them, despite the way that they are perceived. And then there are some who are cognizant enough, like yours truly, who understand the codes but can eke it just enough to not just completely blend in, because what's more boring than looking like everyone else?
Are there items for you, to maybe refine the question a little bit, that you think can gain the wearer access to the proverbial smoke-filled room? The Rolex Daytona. Does fashion provide a point of access?
Absolutely.
And so what are some of those items for you? If not the suit, which maybe one of them, certainly.
Yeah, I used to have a lot of suits. Actually, I had a lot custom made when I was abroad, and then I bought a bunch of Lucio Castro suits.
Yeah.
I mean, beautiful, thick wool, beautiful suits that I ended up giving away because I just never wear them. I mean, went to tailors, did all the work, and I was just like, I don't need these. So I gave them away. But I think, I mean, it depends on the world in which you live, but I think just being in New York fashion set, like a pair of black leather lace-up boots. I think for me, working in fashion, I find that it's always good to have a conversation piece, right? To spark a conversation. Even if it's just like the earring that I wear, or maybe the watch, or maybe the shoe, or maybe it's the sweater, or maybe it's the kerchief, or maybe it's the tie, but an access point because, as adults, it's harder to make friends, but if people have an entry point into you,
right?
If you can, even if it's the glasses you wear, like you're wearing this like weird kind of funky tortoiseshell thing.
Thank you.
It's not weird, actually.
Talk to me.
But it's an access point, and I think that one, fashion can serve as an identifier and a tribe, right? So one says like, I'm a part of this group of people, but then it can also, again, like I said, be a conversation starter. Like you're wearing this rope bracelet that is kind of
incongruous.
A bit of an outlier to the rest of it, and so I'm gonna, I want to know. Oh, that's interesting. What's that about?
And the story behind it is appropriately interesting and maybe a little sappy. But one, I do truly feel that to be stylish, it's important to sort of at least have one item that doesn't match.
Yeah,
because
you don't want to look too considered.
Yeah, unless you're in your tuxedo. But even when you're in your tuxedo, maybe particularly when you're in your tuxedo.
Exactly.
And I'm not one that wears jewelry every day, other than a watch. But this is a bracelet from Mexico that my son actually made down in Mexico. Local artisans, would come to the place that we were staying, and they would teach the kids how to make bracelets. And he made the bracelet, so it's a dear object to me, both because the trip was a lovely one, and the hand that made it was both an artisan's and
no pun intended.
Precisely.
But what it says, right? Just reading it, is that obviously you're considered in the way that you dress, but you don't take yourself too seriously, and so. For me, that's like an access point, right? It's all communication. It's a visual level of communication.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, so you've said in the past that you approach photography as theater. There was a story to it, or a storyline. And the stage on which humans play out their roles, scenes, lives. This seems to be applicable to fashion as well.
Absolutely.
Right? To brand. So what is your take on the theatrical elements of fashion? Be it runway, cosplay, everyday dressing, etc.
I mean, from the runway, that's really how I approach the shows that I do with Pierre Moss. And I think perhaps why it's been successful, or the shows have been successful, is because of, one, my background in theater, also in psychology. My undergrad degree is in psychology. So just understanding the human condition and the ways in which we emote and connect to things. I think for me, the runway is totally theater, and for me, should be theater. I want it to be something that people actually want to
especially today with
physically come
the
to.
Death of the runway. Not the death, but it's becoming a rarer thing.
I think it just needs, like many things, like the radio, like the television, like the internet. I just think it just needs to be recontextualized and maybe rethought, right? Like, what is the role of the runway show? Because I do think that runway shows are very important. I just think that people, again, those boardrooms look like the boardrooms have always looked. And so when there's a need to shift, it doesn't happen. And so it just ends up being the same old shit that you've always seen.
Walk down down a runway to a mix of house music and techno, and
boom,
people sit, people leave, the PR company gets paid,
and who cares, right? I can just sit and look at style.com and just look at the looks. But fashion is costume. I think we're all trying to become. I think we're all in the process of becoming who we think we should be, and I think that fashion, or clothing, or the garment, or the fashion object, can serve as an extension of that, or an access point into that place in which we want to be, or the ways in which we want to present. And I was talking, I'm actually working on an article about transgender, individuals, and the ways in which the garment or the fashion object serves for them as like the first indicator of who they are, despite what the surface level is, despite the skin. So that space between the body and the garment, and how large is that space, how large is that distance, and the ways in which the garment can serve as indicator of who we want to be versus maybe who we are, like at the core.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, this is fashion. These are clothes.
Bringing that comment to commercial terms, I mean, I am seeing more and more brand propositions that are truly unisex, which do have a struggle at retail because, as you know, the system is set up with men's buyers and women's buyers, and there's not a unisex buyer at Saks Fifth Avenue or Nordstrom's and there aren't floors. You go to Barney's, you know where the women's side is and the men's side, and not sure where that would sit. Do you think that a unisex brand proposition or apparel proposition, has legs? Do you think it's maybe capitalizing on a moment that will be a moment and not a lasting one?
I mean, there are several brands that have tried to do unisex clothing. I mean, even in the 70s and the 60s. And I think it's a bit tough because you also have to deal with the culture in which you find yourself. And I remember when I was working retail at the Gap, when I was when the Gap was actually a thing, and I was in college, and there would be guys, and it was not that the store was mixed, but there were sides, right? And there would be a guy that would wander into the women's section and would love a belt. He's like, "Oh man, I love this belt." Da 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 da. And then he'd find out that it was in the women's section, and then he'd put it back. And I'm like, but once it's off the rack, one, no one knows, and two, you like it, so why not wear it? Yeah. But you also have to deal with this mentality, and although you may be able to design things that are unisex, you still have to deal with the customer and the culture in which they find themselves. So I think as great as the proposition could be, I think it's a bit difficult, but perhaps there's a way to just maybe carry it on both sides of the store, right? Yeah. You make this oversized jacket, right? That can be, you have size 1, 2, 3, and 4. You have it in the women's section and you have it in the men's section.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, at our mutual friend Philip's store, I found myself drawn to a pair of military pants that were on the women's side, but so oversized that
they could maybe work.
Yeah, and they did. I got a size. I found out I'm a size 8.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, I'm a big girl.
I'm a size 6.
Yeah. There you go. Let's see. So,
but I think that's one that speaks to the level of self-actualization and conversations that you've had with yourself, right? To be able to even think that this is possible and to just not completely poo-poo it off. But you are in the minority. Now, if men in America had more of this sensibility, then yes, a unisex line could completely work, because there's so many differences between men and women. I mean, I can't go wear a Hervé Leger dress, but
right.
There are certain items that do cross over and can totally fit.
Absolutely.
Either, but you also have to deal with this mentality. But
and for years, I have found myself purchasing, scarves that are in the women's section, or sometimes just accessories in
Yep.
particular, which makes sense for both men and women. So we're both workers in the fashion industry,
Yeah.
right? And often from the outside, so me as a lawyer, you as a photographer, visual creator, most people think it's extremely glamorous, and I don't want that to be leading. But do you agree with that notion? And what are moments of outright glamour that you've had on the job? And then what are moments of complete and total drudgery, as if you were in the salt mines, have you had?
I think it is highly glamorous. No, I'm kidding. I guess there are moments of glamour when you look back, right, at the work, because when you're in the trenches, it's just the trenches, and they're screaming and
The
yelling,
bullets are
and
flying, body parts are
and then you look back at the finished product and you're like, wow, that was gorgeous. Like, actually, for example, this is a perfect example. The last show I did with Kirby at Weeksville in Brooklyn, it was slightly raining, and we literally for a month watched the weather every day. Is it gonna rain? Is it not gonna rain? And it said that one, it's not going to rain. Like, I mean, we're so sure, and then right, and so it was like, and it was just like a slight drizzle, and I was just like, okay, okay, whatever. It's an outdoor show. But people were standing in line outside. Now, mind you, like, I'm directing the show, getting the choir together, like timing things on the runway, all of this. But the decking is wet, and they're trying to open the doors.
Hey, gads.
And Weeksville is such a huge complex,
Right.
that you can't, like, headsets not working, like, I can't,
and people
and so
aren't
I literally
wearing
just
Ugg
went
boots,
and found
or
the
not Ugg
janitor.
boots, hunter boots, or any
Yeah.
footwear that would be appropriate for wet decking.
I just went and found the janitor. I was like, I need 10 mops, like, right now. And I just went out and just started mopping all the decks. And I gave some other people some mops, and they were doing a shitty job, and I had to go over and, like, remop their sections. I got someone with paper towels, were wiping off the seats. And yes, like, I probably shouldn't be doing this, but at the end of the day, the job has to get done.
Right.
And the last thing we need is for someone to slip and fall, coming to the show. And so, yeah, I'm like mopping decks, like, right before the show. But when I saw the video, because again, I was in it, I didn't see it, and I had to stop after 30 seconds because it was so gorgeous. Like, just the light drizzle of rain,
Right.
and like the choir and the girl walking holding like her little son. It was just, it's visually stunning, and that was like a true moment of glamour, planned and unplanned. And so, like, mopping the decks, like, literally,
Right.
actually was worth it.
And did you find, was Kirby a appreciative client in that regard? I have always found that in the industry, our services are very, very appreciated.
Absolutely.
In a way that in other industries, I just don't find it present. The creative mind maybe doesn't align so much with what I do, and therefore, when the legal work gets done and it gets done tightly, it's almost as if a magical act has been performed.
I mean, for sure. I mean, Kirby and I are also friends,
That helps.
And yeah, it does. It does. Or maybe we've become friends in the process, which is also good. But no, totally appreciative. I think it's such a collaborative effort, that one can't but be, well, I hope, that one is grateful, or one is thankful that, your vision is actualized in a way that you could have never imagined, and that takes teamwork, and that also comes from Kirby too, finding the right team, like, and holding on to them, and he's a supreme loyalist, at sometimes to a fault, but we've just built this really great tight team, and we're able to execute and have conversations, and I'm able to speak for Kirby without Kirby being there. Like, that's where we are. I'm like, Kirby, go do the clothes.
I got this.
Like, I got it. I know exactly what he'll say.
So, on a legal note, you photographed Machine Gun Kelly for a limited edition T-shirt. Yes, but the photograph ended up being used kind of all over the planet.
Right.
No attribution given in many cases to you.
Right.
That's your copyright being appropriated. What are your views on how the legal system works for you as a creator, as a photographer, or doesn't work for you in terms of your ability to enforce your rights over your creations?
I think it works pretty well for me, I think. Just because, in the act of creating something, you already kind of have the copyright, whether or not it's registered or not.
Correct.
So that actually is just great. And being a photographer, being
it's a good automatic system.
Yeah, being a photographer, being an image maker, that makes it very easy, that medium, right, to say this is mine, this is not mine, versus, if I made sunglasses or, if I was in fashion, it's a bit trickier.
Yeah.
The range in which you have to kind of claim copyright, I think,
the utility of the object prevents that.
Exactly.
And the photograph itself is not a useful object; it's an artistic object.
Right. And so I think legally, I feel pretty protected. Again, this situation happened, and you're able to just go in with due process, and the law backs you up. Whether or not anything was signed, I mean, that would help and reinforce it.
Yeah.
But whether or not anything was signed or really discussed, the law is kind of there for you, and that I really appreciate. If I was and I have designer friends who've had their designs copied by major fashion houses, and just the legal hurdles to even attempt to have some level of retribution, or at least a cease and desist or something, is something that's just so prohibitive that they just kind of have to let it slide, and the big brands know that. And so in those instances, I think that the law could really, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what the law could do, but I think that they could make it a little bit easier for these levels of copying, where it's pretty similar, and you can definitely see that they're copying and profiting off of this, that they have some level of recourse. Yeah.
What do you think about social media shaming in those instances where a brand
super important? And this is maybe, I think it's always good to find who's kind of hacking the system, who's using whatever technologies they can, because that's where I think you're going to find solutions. Just like even when I think about, Dapper Dan and what he was doing with Gucci and other brands, or when I think about Napster and what they were doing with music streaming, they were really the precursor to Spotify and Apple Music. So what they were saying was like, the system isn't working, but we're going to find a way around it to make it work for the people, because all design is predictive, right? Anyway, we could talk about that. So in the social media shaming, it's kind of this way around law, this way around due process, which can also bite you in the ass, right? Like, it's not a perfect system.
You have to be sure that, in fact, the copying really did occur. And
but accounts like Diet Prada, they have created a whole industry around calling people out, and Virgil is one that they love to call out a lot. But it also has real legs, right? Social media has real legs. Twitter has real legs. To the point of, was it Dolce & Gabbana? Yeah, Dolce & Gabbana, whose show was canceled in China.
Yes.
Yeah.
Over the Pizzagate.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, the pizza ads.
Wait, no, he was talking about something about the Chinese consumer and something, and it was in a DM, and Diet Prada posted it, and this happened a couple of months ago.
Like 2 weeks ago. No? Or 2 months ago.
Yeah, 2 months ago.
It wasn't the pizza ad campaign?
Oh, I have no idea. But there was a show they were supposed to have in China that ended up getting canceled. Like, the Chinese government just shut it down.
Yeah. There have been a number of missteps by admittedly European brands actually in China over the last couple of months that have led to significant backlashes amongst Chinese retailers dropping lines.
Or even the Dapper Dan thing. Like when I spoke to Dap's team about the Gucci show, it was social media. It was Twitter that really drove that entire conversation and that whole dialogue. So yeah, I think the social media watchers, I'll just say, play a really important part actually. Yeah.
Well, Dario, that's a wrap.
Okay, sure.
Gracias, mi amigo.
De nada, de nada.
For coming in. For your troubles, a copy of The Laws of Style shall be yours. You can highlight your quote.
Hey.
And get your own copy. Listeners, you can search on the ABA website or on Amazon. Just put in the name Douglas Hand, The Laws of Style. It should come up for you. Don't forget to follow me on Hand of the Law on Instagram and Twitter. And Dario, you also have your social media feeds, which are Dario the Photog.
Dario the Photog.
Wonderful.
Twitter and Instagram.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Of course.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
You've been listening to The Laws of Style with Douglas Hand. For more information, go to our website at www.hballp.com. And you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Hand of the Law. Thank you for tuning in, and stay stylish.